Welcome to Collegial Conversations with Diana Clark, the professional webinar series that offers clinical and personal perspectives on issues that are common, but often not talked about. Here is today's Collegial Conversation.
Thank you for joining a Collegial Conversation with Diana Clark. Joining Diana today is Richard Hofman. Richard is the author of Addictive Personality and has developed numerous innovative concepts and techniques to accelerate and enhance the treatment of these dependencies. Today, Mr. Hofman, through Hofman Seminars and Training, offers a 3-day Zoom seminar designed to help individuals at all different stages of their recovery to learn about their roadmap to wellness. The seminars provide the tools needed to support a long, solid recovery from addictions and dependencies. Diana and Richard today will be discussing topics around codependency within substance use disorders. Thank you so much for joining today, Richard. I'll pass the conversation to Diana.
Richard, thank you for joining me today. I want to tell our audience first that you hearken from north of the border in Canada. And I think that is in part important because your perspective is not as seeped in how we define recovery below that border. Is that correct?
I would agree with that. I would agree. There are things that when I came into the field here, there are things that we did not know that you must not do or cannot do as determined by the American model. And so we were free to explore treatment from different angles. One of the big differences, I think, for me was the very first treatment center I got involved with back in '79, we treated addiction. We did not treat alcohol abuse or drug abuse. We treated addiction. And then we realized that the same program is beneficial to an overeater or a compulsive gambler. And we had a program that could actually have all these people sitting in the same room. And when folks were saying, well, how can you treat the alcoholic the same way you treat the compulsive gambler, the same way that you treat the overeater or the codependent, we had a model that could fit all that. And we worked towards what we were jokingly calling the unified model. They're like in astrophysics, they're looking for a unified field theory. Well, we were wanting to develop the equivalent of that in the treatment world. And so you're absolutely right that being in Canada, in an area where at that time, especially in Quebec, which is a French-Canadian province, we were free to develop and explore venues that I think would have been looked upon differently in the States.
And I love at one point you had a program where people all started at the same time and graduated at the same time. So they had a cohort of people that they became close with for that reason. Yeah. And it was condensed, it was shorter, but I think one of the things that I observed in hearing about it was that because you didn't have people coming and going all the time, you didn't have that retransitioning with the milieu in the same way that we do in the States when it's a rotating milieu.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that it allowed us to do by having what we call the closed group model was that it allowed us the luxury of a curriculum, so to speak. Early on, back in 1979, I think, or 1980, I begged one of the main treatment centers in the States to allow me to come in and observe how they work. And we had a lot of respect for this treatment center, and I thought this was an extraordinary place. And I begged and begged and begged, and they finally allowed me to come in, and they said, well, you're going to have to sleep on the medical unit. So I slept on plastic sheets, being woken up every 3 hours by the nurse that checked in on the fellow beside me. But I was allowed to observe how an American treatment center worked. And what I realized was there was no way for them to coordinate that the newcomer, the fellow that just came into the unit, that was going to listen to the lecture of the day, it had nothing to do with him. That lecture was beyond what he was comprehending. He wasn't yet even willing to admit that he actually had a problem. We had the luxury in a closed group model to actually harmonize the presentation of the day, the counseling of the day, the group work of the day, the homework of the day, and the individual counseling of the day. That was a great bonus that working that way.
And you brought that in, I would imagine, to your seminars and your workshops now, because it's really, you have honed that in a more intensive, tighter petri dish of residential. Now you get to bring all of that distilled.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I realized was that at Chatsworth, we had all of the presentations, all of the lectures, which I know that people think lectures as just being psychoeducational, blah, 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 but I hope you appreciate that these lectures were designed almost as performance art. They were designed to move you, just like watching a movie being projected on a white screen can bring you to tears or to laughter or make you think. Well, these lectures were designed in a very impactful way so that they would complement the therapeutic clinical work. And what I decided now was to take these lectures, put them in the 3-day seminar to complement the clinical work that is done by the person's home therapist. So basically, disassociating the two, Chatsworth had the lectures and the clinical team all under one roof, and now we've split it, and so that it could be of benefit to a lot of professionals in the field that would want their client to learn what people learned at Chatsworth, and it would complement their outpatient work.
I think one of the things that you bring and Chatsworth brought and your perspective brings is a different definition of what addiction is. Can you talk for a second about how you define addiction and what those core addictions really are?
Yeah. When I came into recovery, it was in 78, personally. I came into my personal recovery in 78 and I got to work in the field in 79 as administrator, and then I switched over to clinical in the early 80s. But there was a lot of good writing back then in the 70s. And of course, the first book that caught my eye was a book that was written in the 50s by Peter Uspensky, The Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution. It's a little book that I would recommend for anyone to read. And of course, I came across, things that interested me. I have a sister. We come from the same two alcoholic parents. And yet here I am, a complete mess, addicted to just about anything that you can be addicted to. And my sister, a fairly well-adjusted human being. And I'm thinking, how does this happen? And I got interested in that. And the more I looked into it, the more I stumbled upon the works of Alfred Adler, and of course his birthright stuff, and Virginia Satir, people making, uh, with all the homage and respect that we want to offer her. And I started looking into this, but the more I looked into it, the more something was missing. The fellow that came the closest to it was, I think, Ken Keyes Jr. in his book, The Handbook to Higher Consciousness. He talked about these lower consciousness levels and higher consciousness levels, and he started talking about the needs and wants, and the needs and wants of security and sensation and power. So we looked at that model, and I said, it's still not complete for what we need in the world of addiction. So we looked at it from this point of view. If we want to make the word addiction something easy to digest for people, we present addiction as being an exaggerated need that is difficult to manage, difficult to control. An exaggerated need, difficult to manage, difficult to control. And
so the need itself, hold on one sec. So the need itself isn't wrong, but the way it is expressed.
Exactly. Absolutely. And when I would try to explain this to people, I would say it's like a body temperature. Everyone has a body temperature. That's normal. But sometimes your body temperature gets elevated and it's called a fever. And sometimes it's so elevated, it can kill you. We need to put you on ice. So from that perspective, you look at needs and wants. Now, everyone needs security. Everyone needs to have some level of control in their life. Everyone needs to have some level of sensations. Why? Because we're sensual beings. We respond to aesthetics. We respond to beautiful things. We respond to good tastes, things that taste good and smell good and feel good. We're sensual beings. And everyone has a need for a certain level of suffering. And it might be counterintuitive, but when you think about it, psychological vaccination, I call it, psychological immunization, right? Okay, you learn your lesson, you try something, ooh, that didn't work out, that hurt. I learned from it, I can adapt, I can adjust. So we need that. So we all have those four needs: the need for security, control, sensation, and suffering. However, what we've discovered in looking at people in recovery, either in the fellowship rooms or coming through our treatment center, we realize that those four core needs are exaggerated in dysfunctional people. They have an exaggerated maladaptive need for security. They have an exaggerated need for control. And it's not that they are successful at controlling, it's just that they have an exaggerated need to try to control.
Mm-hmm.
They have an exaggerated need for sensations, either exciting sensations or numbing sensations. And they have an exaggerated need for suffering, which again is counterintuitive because we've been led to believe that mankind will try to do everything they can to avoid suffering. And here I am saying that some people are actually addicted to suffering to the point where if you take their suffering away from them, they will run across the street to go get more. And the two favorite methods are self-sabotage and crisis creating.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, why is that? Why do they need this suffering? And it really has to do with love and attention and being rescued. And when you think about it from that perspective, you realize that this puts Pavlov's dogs to shame. I mean, it makes Pavlov's dogs look like a kindergarten experiment. Because from the day that you come out of your mother's womb, when do you get the most love and attention? It's when you are in need, when you're suffering, when you're hurt, you're in distress, you're crying. That's when you get the most love and attention. Even if you were raised in the most lovey-dovey, kissy, smoochy environment, you still get more of it when you're suffering. So now, if you have a whole bunch of unmet needs, and suffering got you the attention that you needed, you then talk about conditioned response. You then go back to suffering every time you need to be rescued, every time you need to be forgiven, every time you need to have some love and attention, you go back to recreating suffering so that you can get that. And it really is all about unmet needs. And so, back to, back to Adler and back to all these people that touched upon that. They touched upon the unmet needs. And you add to that now an element of programming, if you wish, of imprints, emotional imprints. And when you add the emotional imprints, which is our messages that are handed to us about ourselves and about life, and we get these imprints that guide us, and we have the unmet needs, and then we have the four core addictions. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they'll address alcohol, substance abuse disorder specifically. And if you put the focus on the medicator, if you put the focus on the alcohol, if you put the focus on the drug, if you put the focus on the gambling or the overeating or the sex addiction or the workaholism, if you put the focus on that and you're not addressing the four core addictions, you're just moving the deck chairs around the Titanic. You're just, you're just trading one for the other.
So I agree with that. And I want to extend the conversation beyond the substance user themselves. Let's talk about the concept of codependency, because I don't think that's any different, but I want to hear your take about how that evolves as well.
Yeah. The original presentation of codependency, I think, was unfortunate that it was presented as a family model that left the idea that here is the dependent. So here's Harry, who's dependent on alcohol, and here is his cohort, the codependent, that collaborates with him in his addiction. And I don't like that. I don't like that because it is so kindergartenish, to me. Codependency to me is an addiction to people, but specifically being outer based. So that my love, my validation, my esteem of self, my acceptance of self, my comfort with self comes from outside of me. It has to be given to me by someone else. That is what codependency is about. And codependency, I got to tell you, codependency is a behavioral pattern, if you wish. It's an addiction. It's I need them to validate me. And when you look at it from that angle, you can see that how many bosses have a codependent relationship with their secretaries, you know? And silly examples like the phone rings and she answers and she says, "It's Harry." "Oh, shh, don't tell him I'm in. Tell him I'm out. Tell him I'm out, you know? And then she lies for him and she says, "Oh, he's out. He'll only be in this afternoon," right? Okay. The collusion, that working together in that way because each need the other one to do something for them. And why do we accept to do this? Because the four core addictions, we don't feel good enough, we don't feel capable enough, we don't feel valued enough, we don't feel the self-esteem that we should feel, that self-esteem, right? Okay. And so the codependency is I am going to expect that human being to fulfill these needs. I'm going to go to that human being to fulfill these needs. I'm going to go to that one over there for that need. And I'm outer based. That to me is what codependency is really all about. It's not about being the wife or the spouse of a dependent person. That's just a caricature approach to it. Codependency is about needing the validation and the love from outside of me. It's being outer based.
Well, we all need that. So, because that is a core need. But I guess what I'm hearing then is completely our sense of self is then dependent upon an outer vision, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Dana, that we all have these needs, right? We all need to be loved. We all love being loved. We love being appreciated. We love being validated. I appreciate a good tap on the back as much as the next fella, right? Okay. But how high is my need level, right? How high is my need level? So from that perspective, it's just again like fever. And then people say to me, "Well, you're really oversimplifying with your examples." But to me, it really is very much like fever. If my need for other people's validation passes a certain level, it gets me in trouble because now I am functioning and living and doing and thinking in order for them to give me what I need. I am now
And I feel
imprisoned.
like, yeah. And when I'm in that position, I feel like somebody's got a gun at my feet going, dance.
That's right.
Power is all about
Yep. That's absolutely true.
at that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, the codependency part, I think is as far as I'm concerned, way more important than even alcohol and drug addiction, because in my estimation, the number one cause of relapses when you have, you're dealing with, helping an alcoholic or a drug addict with their chemical addiction, the number one cause of relapse, as far as I'm concerned, is unaddressed and unhealed codependency, because it goes to the core of who they are, you know, the inability to handle a rejection in a relationship, the difficulty in being able to handle criticism at work, to be able to handle these issues that a normal person can navigate more easily. And so what happens is, because it attacks the core, it attacks how you feel about yourself, it attacks how you deal with yourself. And the pressure gets such, the stress gets such, that you're going to turn to your favorite medicator. Uh, almost
Whatever that
every
is. Right.
I'm
Everybody
sorry, I
has
missed
a
that.
different medicator. Is that what? Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I present, what I do to people is I present the buffet of life, because we all show up at the buffet of life, and then we discover our medicators. You know, we try some of this, we try some of that. We go, oh, I didn't like that, but I love this. Everyone has their different medicators, and if you're medicating, of course, the argument can be made that you're not going to run your car into a ditch if you've overdosed on, ice cream. Yeah, okay, let's say. But still, if you're medicating, if you're turning to that little pint of ice cream in order to medicate, it's because you're not dealing with those four core addictions. And those four core addictions are what need to be addressed in recovery. Excuse me.
All right. Well, I love, for one, your perspective that varies slightly, not dramatically in the idea that people need recovery, but how you get there, how you view it, what you look at. I like your approach, and I really appreciate the differing from our standard US delivery. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I can't see myself working much more of a different way. Now, don't get me wrong. I have a lot of respect. I have a lot of friends in the States, and across Canada and in Europe that are, practitioners. They're professionals in the field. They have outpatient programs, right? And I understand how they work, and I understand how that system is designed to help the individual looking for help. And God bless them. They do good work.
And one program is not a fit for all humans, even.
Exactly.
Yes. So I'm glad,
Exactly.
and there's room for your seminars and workshops. Yeah.
But what I love about this model that we've developed is I can actually walk into a family, mom, dad, and 4 kids, and talk to them about addiction, and they all recognize themselves in it.
Mm.
Talk about being able to do it in a way where I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about all of you, in a way that each one of them recognizes, ooh. And it's so inclusive in that sense that, as far as even treating families on a family model basis, it's a wonderful way of approaching it, I find. Of course, I'm a little biased.
Well, I am with you on this one. I love the idea that anything that creates equality in family members, like you might be struggling today, tomorrow it might be me, is a healthy enterprise for a family to look at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Richard Hofman, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate this.
It was a pleasure. I'm the one that's grateful here. I appreciate the time that you spent with me here. I think it's a topic that needs to be talked about more. So I'm very grateful. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining this webinar. Tune in to more webinars and sign up for our newsletter at o'connorpg.com.